Hello, everyone, and welcome to another show of Hot Topics. Your host, Greg Ochs, is going to have the third and final phase of a very interesting and certainly controversial subject, and that is MNsure. And I have with me the participant who was with me on the first show and second show, and it is David Holt, and he is a local attorney who concentrates on it. David, thank you for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, Greg.
MNsure certainly has been a hot topic, and it has been one that you either curse it or you embrace it, and I'm still not sure which one it should be or shouldn't be. But you know, the first and second show was such a hit because we talked about a lot of subject that is required of everybody. In the first show, we talked about the insurance program for the person, an individual. In the second one, we got talking about companies. And then what I would like to do is make the third show, and it's kind of a cliche, but make it the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's happened, where it's at, and after the period of time that it has been in vogue, I would like to have talk about it a little bit so we can get people back on a track that they are feeling comfortable with, and because it is a mandated program, and so everybody's going to have to comply no matter if they like it or not. So David, with that, let's how would you summarize the individual now? This has been, how many years have they had the program for the person?
So January 1st, 2014, so we're coming up on a year and a half now. So you need some sort of health insurance, or you need an exception or an exemption. So one way or another, you need to be covered or have an exception. And if you don't have some sort of health insurance, you're going to face a tax penalty. And so those of us who are filing taxes and doing our own, there was a spot right on your tax form where you said, I had health insurance for 2014 here. And if you didn't check that box, then you faced a penalty for 2014. And for 2014, that was $95 or 1% of your taxable income, whichever was greater. But that penalty now is going up here for 2015. So as an individual, if you don't have some sort of health insurance or an exception, you're looking at $325 per adult, or 2% of your taxable income, whichever is greater. That's for 2015. So you want to have some sort of health insurance or an exemption. And there's a lot of different ways to get that. It could be Medicare, Medicaid, going through MNsure, or just going out and grabbing a private health care plan.
Now, when you said that there's going to be a penalty without it being, if you choose not to enroll, where does the money go that the penalty is assessed from? Because we all know that it was given to the IRS. So where all does this money go?
So the penalty goes back to the government or the state or the IRS. So the IRS is in charge of the enforcement powers. And unlike usual IRS enforcement powers, the only way that the IRS can grab those is through your taxes or your refund. There's no garnishing of wages, there's no seizing of assets or anything. It's just through your refund. So you're squaring up at tax time, and that's when the penalty is going to be assessed against whatever you have. And I've heard of some pretty creative schemes to try and get around that, but I wouldn't mess with the IRS. They got a pretty good record of my finances, at least. So that's how the penalty is assessed. It's through your tax time and through the IRS.
Now, so the money that would be the money that is the penalty does not go to the state. It goes to the federal.
To the federal. To my understanding, it goes to the feds. I'd have to do more research if it comes back to the state. That's a good question.
Okay. All right. With that being said, then you have companies that can apply for this as well. And in the process of the application, what all is done through a private company, maybe even some public domain, is applying for MNsure coverage. I don't know that. but probably it's more like a small business that is doing it. What do they have to go through, and what kind of forms do they need to go through, and then get the notice back to their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. So to back up a bit, as an employer, as a business, you do not need to offer health care to your employees unless you have 50 or more full-time equivalent employees. So I say full-time equivalent because that's a fancy word that the IRS uses for if you add up all of your part-time employees and full-time employees, what does that look like in terms of just full-time employees? So if you have less than 50 full-time equivalent employees, you don't need to worry about any sort of penalty. But if you're a company that still wants to provide some sort of health insurance underneath that or greater than that, there are tax credits available for you as a business to help subsidize that, because healthcare is expensive, and if you're a smaller business doing that, the state and the feds have felt that there should be some sort of subsidies available. So MNsure has kind of a subset for businesses, and it's called SHOP, or the Small Business Health Options Program. And that's specifically designed for business owners to go in and shop for group coverage for their employees and potentially receive tax credits and have it administered through MNsure and then potentially receive subsidies. Now, that's the only way that a small business owner applying for health coverage would be able to receive a subsidy, and same for an individual who's potentially receiving money to help them pay for their health care premiums. They need to go through MNsure. So to clarify, the only way for either a business or an individual to actually get some help from the government to help pay for their health care is they have to go through the system. And that's just the way of the matter. There's no way around that right now.
Does the process penalize the business owner if he used to provide health care coverage? Let's say because of the economy the last couple of years has been at best in the tank and he couldn't afford to do it. Does the employer that used to get penalized because he's not doing it anymore?
If they're under 50 full-time equivalent employees, they do not have to require or do not need to provide any sort of health care coverage. They can get creative on other ways to provide help to their employees with health coverage, although the IRS is getting a little bit more aggressive on the enforcement of, for example, companies just paying for their employees' premiums, but not actually providing health coverage, if that makes sense. It kind of gets into the weeds of some of the tax law, and I'll stay away from that for now. But there are still small businesses out there that are figuring out ways. I highly recommend any small business to talk to brokers, talk to a business healthcare broker, and see what might make sense and what kind of subsidies they may be available for them. I will say that working with a lot of small businesses, it's very expensive, even with the subsidies, to provide that healthcare coverage. So what I'm seeing, the trend right now in Minnesota at least, is those who were offering some sort of healthcare coverage before the Affordable Care Act are just letting their employees go out into the private market or MNsure to shop for their own coverage. And that's just the fact of the matter with the costs the way they are right now.
You know, having a small business myself, every time we went out to look for a so-called quote better deal on health care,
Yeah.
the last year we got a call from my agent and said that now there's no more such a thing as a group coverage program. It is you can have a group of 40 people, and each person is a group inside this confine of numbers.
Yeah.
And the numbers have dropped drastically for my own little operation, and I'm wondering if it's a possibility that because of these exchanges or whatever you want, brokers, let's face it, MNsure is nothing more than a broker.
Yeah.
And you could end up with a multiple number of different companies that they will assign you to. But yet, I'm wondering if that has been a driving force behind some of these programs of why the prices have dropped, I mean, immensely.
Yeah, and there are a lot of actuaries and people crunching the numbers behind the scenes, and sometimes you get a taste for those when you get, you hear some of the enrollment numbers, or, for example, here when we came up from 2014 to 2015, we saw a lot of the prices in premiums go up, and some of the health insurance plans had kind of really overshot their first year and then needed to adjust. And you got a lot of individuals who, got a notice that, hey, it's going to go up 30%, 60% or more. And, okay, do you want to shop around? What do you want to do? So I think right now, just kind of to generalize on numbers shifting a lot, I think we're seeing a lot of people enter into new plans and new risk pools, and all the numbers are kind of lagging behind, and all of the risk is lagging behind as people like you and me go in and actually use those plans. And so you're seeing, all sorts of dips and spikes in the prices as it reacts to these pools. And I think that'll slowly sort itself out and become more predictable, but right now the prices are all over the place.
With that summation that you gave on single and the business,
Yeah.
now I want to get to the program.
Okay.
And as I had mentioned, I wanted to call this the good, the bad, and the ugly. With everything that has been going on and everything that we hear on TV, if you summarized, I hate to use bad, but how would you summarize the difficulties that the exchange has had, and how is the exchange working themselves out of it?
Yeah. So from my experience as an attorney working with some of the individuals going through MNsure and the process, some of the bad things I'm seeing is certainly poor communication, or individuals not knowing whether or not they're enrolled in a plan, and simply contacting MNsure to figure out, hey, am I enrolled? Am I not enrolled? Where am I at? Did you receive payment that I sent in? I've certainly heard a lot of frustrations in that regard. And that's scary if you don't know if you're covered or not, because you may go break your leg. You may go and have a lot of medical bills and not know if that insurance is in force or in place. And to answer your second question, what's being done? Well, I think this is, again, it's a big IT issue, really, because at the end of the day, MNsure is a big online IT broker. You go to MNsure to shop for plans, and then they put you into plans and determine what subsidy to pay to you. So a lot of that is done online and through a bunch of computers. So they've really ramped up their IT staffing. It still hasn't caught up with the number of individuals calling in and also simply administering the plans and getting notices out to people and catching up with the demand of people. But I think it's heading in the right direction. That certainly costs a little bit more resources than were originally projected, and I don't think it's at a very good spot right now. For example, I had a woman who I talked to just last week who was on hold for 5 hours. She called in at noon, figured that'd be an okay time. Noon, I think it was midweek, and was on hold from noon until 5 p.m. And then the dialer came on and just said, we're not taking any more calls, call again tomorrow. So that can be very frustrating when you're simply trying to figure out where you're at, where money that you're paying in is going for invoices for your premiums, and you can't get a hold of the system. That concerns me a little bit, especially when this is mandated that people have coverage, and for some people, their only option is to go through MNsure to get some sort of subsidy to make it affordable for them. But if they then can't communicate and figure out what they have, that's a little bit concerning. But hopefully resources are being invested into IT and building that and getting a more lower wait time for the call center so people can get on the phone. And hopefully the issues are being resolved. Obviously, we're at a very high, right now, in April, we're getting past the open enrollment. So a lot of people are in new plans or just got into some and have questions. So granted, it's a very high demand time, but I think that we have another open enrollment period coming up. There'll be more in the future. We certainly need to, as a state, get that so it's responsive to individuals.
How would you know that you have coverage before you have to use it if there's been bad communication?
Yeah. So you should receive a notice from MNsure about your status and what's going on. There has been some delays in some of those notices going out, which is not good. But at least through the online enrollment, you should have an idea of what plan you may have been put into. And if you receive any sort of notice, you have to understand that there's a difference between MNsure, which is kind of the administrator behind the scenes, and then your insurance company, the Medica, Blue Cross, UCare, and who's actually administering your health insurance. So if you know that you have health insurance or you think you might have health insurance with a company, reach out to that company themselves and say, hey, I went through MNsure, I'm pretty sure I'm enrolled with you, can you check your records? That's one way to check. Otherwise, unfortunately, the only other way is to ask MNsure and figure out where you're at. And that can be kind of frustrating to wait on the phone or send in letters to figure that out, but unfortunately, that's what we're left with right now.
Where is MNsure's office? That somebody wanted to get in the car and go down and confront people and say, do I or don't I? What is going on? Please expose my file so we can talk about it and find out what's happening. Where could somebody go for something like that?
Yeah, it's St. Paul right now. I'm trying to think of the cross street, and I'm trying to think of if it's open to the public. I can't recall if it is, but it's in St. Paul.
I bet it's not.
Google. So if you go to mnsure.org, they should have on there their street address down in the contact information, and that is where you would go. Also, there are also hearings that they have. For the board, the MNsure board, which is part of the governing body, and those are open to the public. So I highly recommend that anyone who's having any sort of frustrations and they want to share their story, or they've talked to a few of their friends and they realize, hey, I'm not getting the notices either, I need to tell somebody about this, go to those hearings and voice your concerns there, because then that's going to get out to a broader audience, and other Minnesotans can hear, your experiences, and hopefully we can deal with those. And there's other people that go to those hearings, and when they hear your story, they may know who to connect you to get it situated.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was my understanding when MNsure first came about that it was a program under, like, the Health and Services Department or something like this.
Yeah.
Is it still, or have they now tried to develop, well, the government would do that, try to develop it into its own freestanding governing department within the confines of the state?
Yeah.
Is that what the process has done now?
Yeah, it's a separate entity, and it's funny you asked that, because I was back a little ways back. I was working inside at the state as a consultant, and we were deciding what it was going to look like, what Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was going to look like in Minnesota. And one of the options was to put it underneath the Department of Human Services, but it was decided to actually go against that, and now it's its own separate entity. But if you do an appeal through MNsure, so if something goes wrong and you want to appeal it and say, hey, this isn't right, I want to be heard before a judge, that is actually administered through the Department of Human Services because they already run a lot of appeals through other state programs. So it can get kind of confusing because you'll see just kind of working through an appeal and some of the notices, you'll see MNsure on the letterhead, but you'll be talking to a judge or somebody working over at the Minnesota Department of Human Services. So that's where it can get a little bit confusing. Of course, the funding right now is coming through the same tunnel. You know, it's all coming through the state and feds, so it's a government entity still, but it's its own separate entity.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
If somebody is uninsured, do they ever have to get back and deal with the federal program of Obamacare?
Yeah, so MNsure is the Obamacare for Minnesota. So Minnesota made the choice to set up its own exchange, which is just a fancy word for its own online administrative system for Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. And so when you hear in the media the federal exchange, there are about half of the states-ish chose to go with the federal exchange. So they just all use one big computer admin system, whereas other states, such as Minnesota, decided to build their own. So whenever you hear exchange, that could be a state exchange or it could be the federal exchange, but that's just a fancy word for that online broker that puts people into the plans. So MNsure, we are our own entity running within our state confines and our own plans and our own IT system.
Now, I do not know, I should probably know, but I do not know how many employees there are currently with MNsure, but most state programs start off minuscule and they turn into being very large.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of the number of employees?
No, I wish I did, but you know, that would be a good question to ask at one of the public hearings there, because I know that they do hire quite a few consultants to come on, like the IT. You know, that's kind of a temporary, you know, work until it's fixed, and then cut back down.
Yeah.
And also with the call center, you know, that's really ramped up for high demand and then cut back down. And it's also a little bit confusing because, again, like we were talking about with the appeals, those are all run through the Minnesota Department of Human Services. So you kind of have these state employees that are in a hybrid role. And it's kind of tough to say, okay, well, are you an employee for MNsure or are you an employee for the Department of Human Services? And which one are we counting you towards? Because just having MNsure up and running is actually taking a lot of resources from other state agencies, and other state agencies have had to ramp up their employee workforce just to regulate and keep you know, the fraud or some of the taxes that run with MNsure and keep all that up and running. So great question. I wish I had the answer. That's a long rambling for no. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. My next question would be then, do you know how many total enrollees?
Yeah. Okay. What do we got here?
And my next question from that, you can answer them all at one time.
Yeah.
My next question is that, is an enrollee that's a minor classified as an enrollee separately, or is it classified as an enrollee, you know, totally under the parent guise, and it's counted as one unit?
Yeah, no, they should have it. From my understanding, my numbers are for each head is worth an enrollee, a person. And we're at, this is taken off the website today, what are we, late April 2015. There were 61,874 in qualified health plans. I didn't write down the Medicaid and Minnesota Care, which are a little bit down. But the qualified health plans, again, are the ones where somebody just went to MNsure and they got put into a private plan. And they may receive some subsidies, they may not receive any at all. The individual may have just went through MNsure thinking that it was the only way to get health care, and then they got filtered into a plan, but were above the limit to receive any sort of subsidies. So 61,000. I will say, I can give you a percentage of the state. We're over 95% of the state of Minnesota is enrolled, the population is enrolled in some sort of health plan, which is the highest in state history. So there is some good.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Because some people direly need health
Yeah.
coverage and they weren't before able to get
Yeah.
it or afford it.
Yeah, yeah. So there's certainly good and there's bad. And then there's ugly. So
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
yeah. But that's what I have for numbers. Yeah.
Theoretically, with those numbers,
Yeah.
let's just round it off and say there's 160,000. And let's say the average premium is $400.
Okay.
So 160 times 4 is what? 320 twice, so you got 700 and some $1,000
Yeah.
as generated revenue coming in on premiums.
Yeah.
How in the world can a government agency function on less than millions of dollars?
I don't know. And this is a conversation that's been going on right now at the state legislature and also at the board hearings. Is how is MNsure going to continue to be funded? And one of the right now the big initial bump has come from federal money. Grants that were part of the Affordable Care Act, and that's free money, but not really. Nothing's really free. There's
It's our
cost
money.
to everything. Yeah, yeah.
It's a different
taxpayer
It's
money.
taxpayer money.
Yeah. But going forward, the thought is that those who go through MNsure are going to pay a small tax on top of their premiums that then helps for the administration of the programs. So those who are using MNsure, you could call it a service fee, whatever you'd want, a broker fee, if you will, and those are going to be charged and just added to the premiums as part of the service.
Is there any possibility that the state will come to the conclusion that they're taking in less than $1 million a year, and at the cost of surgical procedures? Let's just take I'll use myself as an example. When I had my bypass surgery, my cost was $160,000. All you'd have to have is 3 or 4 of those in the state, and you've gone past what the total revenue is. And I was kind of curious, not only because I was bored in the hospital, so I went online and found out what average there was daily in the state of Minnesota on heart surgeries, heart bypass surgeries, everything else, and it came in at about 40 a day. So your first day of coverage is more than the total revenue that the whole state takes in.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of wondering, with this analogy, is there a possibility the state will come back and say, Mr. Obamacare, we no longer choose to participate in this, and all the people that are in our program were given to you?
Yeah, we could default to a federal exchange. So in that situation, MNsure would fold. I don't know exactly what that would look like.
Oh, it'd be ugly. That's what I told you. We're
It'd
coming
probably
to
be
the
ugly.
ugly. That's really going to be ugly.
Probably be ugly. And we would default to the federal exchange, which would be, rather than going to MNsure.org, people will go to healthcare.gov and select that they're in Minnesota, and then they would go through whatever plans were approved to operate in Minnesota. And like a handful of other states, we would have the feds administer our plan, and that would be that. And the funding for that is, a whole nother show, we could say.
I was going to say that would really be ugly for the average
Yeah.
person. I mean, that would be a tough one. Has there been any rhetoric that you're aware of that's come back on the Obamacare that is in some of the states that chose not to have their own exchange and are just using the federal exchange as to the functionality and how that is working?
Yeah, I've heard pros and cons both way. I can't say that state exchanges versus the federal exchange, one has shown to be great. I think there's been issues with both. There's been success stories with both based on who you ask, and there's been a lot in between. I do know some of the state exchanges have fared quite poorly compared to the federal exchange, but I can't say that one is well above the other yet. Yeah. And that may change here once we get into years 2 and 3. January 1st, 2014 was, all right, the law's in effect, you need some sort of health care, here we go. Now that we've gotten past the first year, we're seeing a lot of movements, a lot of edits, a lot of changes, and I imagine as we move forward, we'll be able to really see, did the states do very well, or did the federal exchange do very well, as we're able to collect more and more data? And again, as people are able to use their plans more, and we get a better idea for what the numbers really look like. Because it's one thing for me to enroll into a plan and start paying in premiums and for, start crunching the numbers for 1 year. But, let's look at some of the data over 3 or 5 years and see, okay, who's really using the healthcare? Who's paying in the most, who's paying in and not using the healthcare, so they're, helping the others. And what do those numbers look like across the states? And then, the big question is going to be, which states were the most efficient, per dollar for a government employee? What was the value that was delivered to the state per capita? That's my question, is really kind of value-based, more business, and focusing on that metric rather than, a number here or a number there.
The concept and the idea, I think, is good. I do believe that I guess I'm not a socialist like some countries where you're cradle to grave, you're taken care of. And I do feel that there's a lot of times there's responsibility on people's part for themselves. Big brother can't take care of everybody. But at the same token, there's a lot of people that can't take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, and MNsure, there are a few other programs in the state that offers health insurance. Are those people in that number, or is that numbers that some of the outside of there? I don't know them all. Maybe you know them.
Yeah.
But this 160 some thousand, and some change. Theoretically, we could easily, with all the other programs and people qualifying for them, we could be well over 1 million people into health coverage by the state of Minnesota.
Yeah.
Now, do you know off the top of your head what the other programs are?
Yeah. Yeah, I can give a listing, and this goes back to the 95% of Minnesotans have some sort of health coverage, and I wish I would have brought the breakdown and each numbers in our population. But some of the other programs, and there's a lot of them, so it's tough to keep a finger on them. But Medicaid is down there for lower income individuals or individuals with disabilities. Then we move up into Minnesota Care, which may actually get roped into what are called qualified health plans. But Minnesota Care is, you have a little bit more money, but still not enough to pay high healthcare premiums by yourself. Then we move into qualified health plans. And these are plans that are sold through MNsure, where you may receive a subsidy, you may not, but they are through MNsure. And that's going to be dependent on your income or your family household income and who you're providing for. And then we have kind of in the middle, and that's going to be just your private health plan. Me going to the insurance company and saying, "Hey, I'll pay you $200 a month, and that's that. It's just me by myself." Then we start moving into some of the more specialized programs. There's TRICARE for people in the service. There's Medicare when you get a little bit older, or disability or end-stage renal disease. And a few others depending on if you have a disability or are in a very unique situation. So there's actually quite a few different programs you could fall into. Granted, with MNsure and the Affordable Care Act, you're seeing a sliding scale of how much the government will help with a subsidy to help you out on your healthcare premiums depending on your income. It's all based around what's affordable to get healthcare coverage.
Now, if you're married, do they take your income for determination of your premium for MNsure? Do they take it if you're married? Do you have to file under a joint?
So actually, that's a good question. So depending on if you file joint or single, that will determine how much of a premium you get, because there can be a gray area in there if you're separated or in some unique situation. But
or even divorced and you've got child support and children.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a flexible range there based on how you want to file. And I don't do any family law, but I know divorce or family law attorneys can get very creative on who's going to pay for the health care coverage for the kid, and depending on who's actually paying, how much of a subsidy you would get. So, if you're smart about it, you want to allocate the health care to the individual, the partner, who's going to get the most subsidy.
Yeah.
Just so the kid is covered.
Well, and I can remember probably about a year ago, we did a show with the county. Now, does the county have a co-pay responsibility for MNsure also?
Oof. Not sure on that one. Not sure.
Okay.
The county is in charge of the administration of a lot of public health care programs.
I know that.
But I'm not sure if they have an added tax in there.
Okay. And getting back, what you said TRICARE is for the military.
Yep.
What's that? You just about knocked me over.
Yeah,
with that
so
one.
that's one for people of the service coming back, and there is a program for them to receive healthcare coverage. You just Google TRICARE, search online, and they'll show you if you're eligible. It's a pretty convenient online form. I've done it a couple times for friends, and yeah, that's the program there.
Well, has there ever been discussion of consolidating all the programs under one? And I'm not saying MNsure is going to be the survivor. Okay.
Yeah.
It could be Minnesota Care, could be a couple other ones. Has there ever been talk about that?
Yeah.
Because that would make the most sense. Then you're going to have a consolidation of resources, employment needs. They can certainly put it on a computer. It'd take them, probably a week to put it all in and get it going. But
yeah, I'd hope so.
And
it's interesting because if you kind of look at the history of our healthcare system and what started out with Medicare, Medicaid, and now how we've kind of moved into the Affordable Care Act, you have all these different agencies that are, you're in your own little compartment or your own little world, and then you're communicating with other agencies, and that's where you get a lot of this, a lot of the issues, is that it's tough to get all the data in between, one bulky agency to another. So there's certainly been talk of consolidation. That's a lot tougher than it sounds. I will say there's certainly talk to push even way further in the other direction, even further, and say single payer. So you're just cutting out all of the insurance companies, and you just have the government paying for all of the health care. And it doesn't matter if you're, in the military, disabled, old, doesn't matter. We're going to figure out a way to pay for your health care. And that's what some other countries certainly use in the world. And we're always talking about the pros and cons. And that's why we're here, right?
Well, from what I gather, correct me if I'm wrong, but with Sweden, the government takes care of everything. There's no insurance companies in Sweden.
Yeah.
There's rider companies that you can, and quote, they state the wealthy people of Sweden have a rider which gives them the opportunity to go any place in the world and get services rendered with the state or the country paying for it.
Yeah.
And I never even gave it a thought when I was over there, but now I'm sitting back, and as we've been talking, you get these different thoughts and mulling around, and I don't know if it's been working or not.
Well, yeah, and there's pros and cons, and now we're moving out of Minnesota into the world. But, there's certainly on the con side, I mean, pros, it's covered. It doesn't matter what I have or, all the admin work, it's covered. But you look at some of the cons, if you look up, to the north into Canada, the waiting time to get in to have a procedure can be pretty long. And then there's questions about quality. If you really want to shop around, you don't have as much choice when it's all paid for by one entity. So, there's certainly pros and cons on both sides, and I'm sure we'll continue to debate and discuss those as we move through some of the current kinks too.
It seems like at the state capitol, there's a growing animosity against the program because with as few people involved, and all you need is a half a dozen major deals, and you're in the red so deep you won't be able to come out of it. And if you got 160,000 people, and if I'm not mistaken, I think I read that the average person makes 3 clinical or hospital emergency room visits annually. And that is man, woman, child, you name it. There's no delineation between them.
Yeah.
And with that being said, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And when you start looking at this and start to build on it, the insurance is great, understandable, certainly justifiable. Now with MNsure, are there deductibles with that? I mean, when you let's say that I go online, ding, 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 and I'm on MNsure, and all of a sudden I'm a single subscriber, and I got mixed emotions about how much policy I want, so I put in minimal. And minimal, they come back and say your monthly premium is $250 a month.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you start going to the clinic, and then all of a sudden you're getting a lot of large bills back on $250. Do they tell you what your deductible is? And
yeah.
I mean, is it sophisticated enough that you kind of know what's going on?
Yeah, and that's the big, the big function of MNsure is to really communicate what a plan covers, what you're really getting for your buck, and then be able to compare them side by side. And so, yeah, when you go on and price shop or search around for coverage, you should be able to see the basics, the deductible, the copay. Co-insurance is another one, a big one. And then, a view of the network too. The network meaning where you can go for covered services, and if you don't go to those ones, it may not be covered at all or at a very reduced rate. And so there's a lot of factors that go into your decision. You could take the route where, hey, I'm a pretty healthy guy. I'm getting health insurance because, I might break my leg and really need it. But otherwise, I'm probably not going to go in 3 times. I'm probably below average. So I just want to get that minimum premium just to kind of be compliant with the law. And I don't care if I have a really high deductible because, hey, I'm going to take my chances. I kind of need the money right now. So that would be a more catastrophic plan where I'm just, I have a high deductible, meaning I'm going to pay a lot if something does happen. But otherwise, month to month, it's going to be pretty small. And then on the whole other end of that, you could be a little bit more sick and hey, I'm going to actually be in there 6 times this year, and I know I'm going to be in there because I got a heart condition. Then you're looking at a plan where you have a very low deductible. So throughout the year, your out-of-pocket expenses are going to be low, but your premium's going to be a little bit higher. So every month you're going to pay quite a bit more, but you're going to go in quite a bit, so you're really offsetting that. And in the MNsure and the federal exchange too, they have, they call them the metal levels. So there's bronze, silver, gold, and platinum, and then also catastrophic. And in each of those, you're going up 60%, 70%, 80%, 90% of cost being coverage. Of course, if you get up into the 90%, you're really going to pay each month for that. So you really got to weigh those factors against each other and know what you really need as an individual. And I think that's the biggest component for, you know, an average person just checking it out online. Really do your research, because you could save yourself a lot of money knowing what you need or what your family needs, and not overbuying or underbuying and then get caught on the back end with medical bills. So I think there is some value into not just thinking about what is this going to cost me right now, but really what's my health and my family's health situation if I'm purchasing for them, and what plan really fits that need. There's all sorts of online tools out there to help with those. And you can just kind of look back, you know, 2 or 3 years and say, okay, here's what we really paid here, and do that kind of an analysis.
Does any institution, whether it be a clinic, whether it be a hospital, whether it be a nursing home, and whatever I'm forgetting, have the legal right to refuse service?
That's a tough question. So emergency services, no. If you come in on emergency service, they should not be able to turn you away. But depending on your coverage in other areas, there is the ability to turn down a patient, depending on what type of coverage they have. That is a right. So it gets into a very interesting area, which I'd probably need to grab a whole nother sheet and a whole nother episode for. But yes is the short answer. You can deny care.
Yeah, have you ever had a client come to you for a discriminatory litigation case against a health provider because they refused services?
Yes, and those are quite tricky. You got to really dig into those. And the healthcare providers are usually pretty slick in making sure that those cases don't arise. They're pretty good, especially in Minnesota. But I have seen a few of those cases, absolutely, where and it's usually fishy. You can usually smell it, and it's generally somebody who needs a lot of care, and the healthcare provider is going to come out behind financially, and there's some sort of reason that you're denying the patient in the first place because you don't want to take on that financial burden. And you know, it's kind of a little bit of number crunching in the background. That's, you know, what I've suspected, and then it comes down as, you know, we can't take your insurance, or it disguises itself as some other reason.
I had a unique situation that I know of. A customer of mine hired a subcontractor, and that subcontractor hired a number of employees and didn't provide any health coverage. And they had an opportunity to go to another border state and do some work through this whole process. And in this other state, they got severely hurt. And what they ended up doing is hiring for a minority status and all these kind of things. And this fellow, his wife owned the company, but she didn't take out any insurance on him or any of the other workers. And he got hurt. And then the state wanted to so-called relieve themselves of a outlandish amount of money for a medical expense and ship them back here. And the state of Minnesota said no also, because he didn't have work comp in the other state, he didn't have all this, and they said it didn't happen here, so we have no provisions in the law to provide for it. And this, unfortunately, this fellow was married with 4 kids, and the oldest one was like 9, and he goes down to 1. And under Obamacare, I think that would be satisfied. But under the MNsure, they didn't have to satisfy it. And I don't know why. But I'm just sharing with you this story. And it's a sad story because of the fact that he was really hurt. But with that being said, under those circumstances, many contractors sub-work to other people, and then they'll end up getting hurt. If they didn't have coverage at all, is there a program that the state would have that these people would be able to participate in and have coverage to help them through this tough time?
Yeah, so if they didn't have any policy in force, there's certainly programs available to them depending on their income, absolutely. But if they didn't have any sort of health insurance and then they took a big hit, unfortunately, there really are not, there's not like a fund that is there for those types of individuals. And I will say the most likely scenario there is going to be negotiating that down or bankruptcy. I mean, the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States right now is medical debt, medical bills. So for that situation, they would be negotiating and saying, hey, I can't pay this. I'm looking at bankruptcy, or we can negotiate and I can get you something rather than nothing, because otherwise, I'm going to wipe the slate clean. Let's work with each other here. It's not an ideal situation. I probably should have had health insurance, but let's talk. I mean, you want something, right? So bankruptcy, medical debt leading to bankruptcy is, I see that quite a bit right now.
That brings us to another subject. How much ability does hospitals and clinics have to collect money if people don't have the ability to pay?
So you start out with a medical bill, and you're working with your healthcare provider, the hospital, the clinic, the doctor. And that bill, generally, you have about 90 to 120 days, if you're in Minnesota, where it's just them sending you the invoice and saying, hey, pay this, here are the terms, talk to us, figure something out. If you were to completely ignore that, in all likelihood, it would immediately then go to collections. And the collections process is, it's kind of a wild west. So there's all sorts of collection agencies out there that they'll buy medical debt, for pennies on the dollar. And then their job is to collect on the behalf of that hospital, and they take a cut. So they'll go after you. They may and they can file a judgment. So they could say, hey, you owe this debt. You can dispute it, but we're filing now in court to get a judgment against you. A judgment's just a fancy legal term for, you have to pay this, and you legally have to pay this now. And then they can figure out, if that judgment is successful, how to collect on that judgment. And there's a few different ways. You could garnish wages. You could submit it to the state for taxes to be withheld for them, when you're filing for income or property. And any way that they can levy that judgment against you, they can collect that money. I will say that this kind of leads back into the bankruptcy situation, where if that does happen, you could discharge that in bankruptcy. And I say that original debt was because of medical debt, and it gets roped in with leading cause of bankruptcy again. So yeah, if you have an outstanding medical bill, it can go all the way and come back and get you and follow you and be collected on.
This doesn't got anything to do with it, but has there ever been a published report as to the amount of bad debt hospitals and clinics and everything have to write off because it's uncollectible and
Yeah, it's a high amount. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but uncompensated care is the term, and there's a lot of it. And a lot of, I will mention this just because, I do work a lot with medical bills and, negotiating and trying to help those people avoid bankruptcy and stay afloat. Nonprofits, in order to maintain their status as a healthcare provider, are kind of required to provide a certain amount of uncompensated care to obtain the tax advantages that they get for being a nonprofit healthcare provider. So there is a lot of uncompensated care. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you look at it and the percentages and the numbers, there's a lot going on. And that leads to the ability for the providers to negotiate a little bit, because if I'm looking at bankruptcy on one hand or getting you, a percentage of that huge bill that, I can't control when I get cancer, but I had health insurance and it paid you something. Let's look more at getting you something and working together rather than, wiping this clean, because no one really wins right there. I don't win, the hospital doesn't win because they don't get any of the money. They can write it off, but you can only write off so much in a year, and then you get to the point where, okay, well, we got to balance the books a little bit more and run the business.
yeah, there's like HCMC would be one big one. I would imagine that they get a lot of Friday and Saturday night walk-in trade.
Yeah.
And one of my daughter's best friend became an emergency room doctor and ended up working in Kansas City. And she said it's just unbelievable. All night long, the waiting room is full.
Yeah.
All night long. And I'm just sitting back, you got to be kidding me. She goes, in any given night, I could see 30 people without batting an eye.
Really?
Yeah, all the way from hitting their hand with the hammer, hitting their thumb, and breaking the nail, all the way to falling out their window and falling onto the ground. I mean, just you name it. Everything from A to Z.
Yeah. And hopefully there's some sort of program available for them. Medicaid, most likely. Because the whole philosophy behind the Obamacare Affordable Care Act is, healthcare should be affordable, and even if you have nothing, you should have something. So I'm hoping that the majority of those people with the walk-ins have some sort of coverage, or they're thinking about getting it, because then, that doesn't help out the hospital having a ton of that uncompensated care.
I agree. Now, well, we've done the bad and the ugly, and it's certainly been kind of interesting and enlightening. What can we say is good?
Yeah, so again, we have over 95% of Minnesota's population is now enrolled in some sort of health care program, and that's the highest in state history. So people are entering into plans, they're getting coverage. You're seeing people and families who have never had health care coverage before getting it, which is good, and then they can focus on other expenses in life rather than always worrying about health care. I've certainly heard a lot of success stories for people enrolling in plans for the first time and using them, and they worked. They covered what they had to. It made it affordable for the individuals, and I've heard about people who had pre-Affordable Care Act, pre-existing conditions, and insurance companies wouldn't touch them. And now they've moved into plans where it's affordable and they are forced to be accepted. And that's great. I mean, there really weren't options for them pre-Affordable Care Act, and now there is. So there certainly are, and if you go to MNsure.org, they have plenty of success stories, and they usually start out their hearings or their board meetings with a success story from a local Minnesotan, and there's plenty out there. And there's good and there's bad. There's certainly good as well.
In this MNsure, we've got the ability finally for handicapped people to get coverage. Mm-hmm. This was something that they didn't have before, and they were reliant on other branches to get some coverage. And then you're always hearing on TV the plea for somebody that had some unusual situation, and they start a fund to help offset it all. And that was really good for some of the people, mm-hmm. To have that happen.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. A lot of these situations, they didn't ask for it, and you just kind of look at it and you feel bad for them, because what they have to go through is just heartbreaking, as a whole.
Yeah.
But what I was kind of wondering is, when we talk about the membership and the numbers and the online and the application, has anybody ever not been accepted into a program?
Well, I haven't heard of people being flat out denied from a program, but I've certainly heard of individuals applying and not knowing whether or not they were accepted or denied, which is probably worse, because if you're denied, then I need to look somewhere else, and I know I don't have coverage. But I've certainly heard of individuals who applied, their portal, they have some sort of account, they did the MNsure, they went through, but the online response hasn't really indicated whether they're covered or not. And that's kind of frightening, because you need to know where you're at and if you're covered or not. So I have heard of that. So I guess that'd be a yes. You can be denied for subsidies, for example, and you can appeal that. You can say, hey, well, here's my income. Why am I not getting a subsidy? But you have to be, the plans themselves at least can't discriminate on you for coming in. So haven't heard of that yet.
Well, I'll tell you what, we could go on and on and on with this.
Yeah.
And I enjoy it immensely, because there's so much that can be talked about, so much that can be looked at. And I certainly, I hope that the state gets their act together and gets it fixed. They certainly got the resources to hire the people that are necessary to get it done. And they just got to get it done.
Yeah.
With all that being said, what have you got to say to the public other than what we've already talked about? Have you got anything to value add to it? Because we've covered a pile of stuff.
Yeah.
And, it's, we're going to have to end this at some point in time, even though we could just keep on talking and going on and on and on about it. But I'm going to give you a few minutes and
soundbite.
Talk to the cameras. It's all yours.
Cool, I appreciate it. So I'm a local healthcare attorney here in Minnesota, and one thing that I've done now off of my private practice, after working with a lot of people with medical bills, both with health insurance and without, is helping them negotiate those down to avoid bankruptcy and really help them, move on with their lives, but still not have their health care and medical bills be a barrier. So I've done that in private practice, but I've also just created a company. It's an online training course to teach individuals or patients how to negotiate their medical bills and better manage their healthcare expenses. And the big thing is prevent large medical bills in the future. And it's just cutmedicalbills.com. No fancy name. It's just exactly what it says. That's what we do.
There you go.
And I put the power in the patient's hands. I mean, I hate to say it, but you don't need an attorney in most situations. There's certainly some sticky situations where attorney is great, but The whole point of making this training course was that so a patient better understands their health care and doesn't show up for treatment and then get that bill that kind of looks like a bill, but it's not really a bill. And then 3 months later gets the huge medical bill and they don't know how to deal with it. So check it out, cutmedicalbills.com, really cool stuff. We got some users going through already and already negotiating down their medical bills, which is really cool. And I really appreciate you having me out here again. And I'm happy to come back and answer questions, and I'm sure we'll be discussing MNsure and Obamacare some more.
What I would like to do at this point is extend an opportunity to our viewing audience to get a hold of the station, come up with a list of questions, things that they would like to know. I'd even like to bring them in and have them sit here and ask you questions that they may have that they're not getting an answer.
Sure.
And let's open it up to the public. I mean, this is, this is who it's for, and we want the program to work, and as much as we can do to help make it work is what we've got to do. And I think with that being said, I would like to thank our viewing audience for once again taking the time to listen to one of the many issues that there are with the MNsure program. Like I told you, there was the good, the bad, and the ugly. We spent a lot of time on each one. I want everybody to go away not thinking that it's a disaster, but to thinking as an opportunity. The system's going to correct itself, and it is going to get better. And I do want all of you to take advantage of it if you need to, and utilize it, because that's what it's for. And the good thing about it is we do have people like David who can help us out and make sure that all of us are being treated fairly. With that being said, David, thank you for coming on again.
Thank you, Greg.
I'm sure we will be back talking some more.
Thanks.
And once again, thank you for listening to Hot Topics and your host, Greg Ochs.